special meeting of the Board of Education. First item of business is approval of agenda.
Move we approve the agenda.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Really quick before we move on, Vanessa Sandburn, I'll just make a quick note. She had a prior commitment and was unable to revise it in her schedule, so that is the reason that she is not here today. So first item is the consent agenda. Consent agenda items are those that are considered routine and are adopted by one motion unless any board member or the superintendent requests that an item be removed. The item or items removed are voted on separately. I see that you have a retirement.
I have a retirement to recognize today. The administration would like to recognize Deborah Carpenter for her 24 years of service and devotion to this community and its schools.
I move the Board of Education adopt the items listed on the consent agenda.
Have a second?
Second.
Janice? Yes?
Yes.
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 Okay. Next item, moving on to reports. First report tonight is the new Kansas Education Systems Accreditation Model with Terry McEwen, Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, and Kirsten Wondra, Assistant Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment.
Terry McEwen, Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment. We're going to present a little information, background information on the new accreditation system that actually begins officially next school year. This is called year 0 for it, and then there is a 5-year cycle, which we'll explain momentarily. Once upon a time, a few years ago, we were accredited under the Quality Performance Accreditation System. Essentially, that schools had to present 11 quality criteria, such as school improvement plans were in place, they had a fully licensed staff, they were providing programs and services to support student learning, and they were in compliance with local policies. There were also 4 performance criteria, which were student performance, participation rate in state assessments, attendance rate, and graduation rate. So those 4 performance criteria actually morphed into being the entirety of what caused accreditation to take place after full implementation of No Child Left Behind. Basically, it boiled down to, were you meeting the percent proficient on the state assessment, yes or no, and if it was yes, you're accredited. If you're no, you could be on one level or another of improvement, either on improvement or some other level of sanctions. However, nobody was ever not accredited under that measure. So finally, adequate yearly progress was really basically the only metric, and the 11 quality criteria were still there, but were just kind of cursory check boxes. In fact, it got to the point where I would just send out an email saying, answer these questions this way, so it was really meaningless. During the waiver time, we adopted what was called annual measurable objectives, and what that basically said was that instead of percent proficient, you had to either be meeting proficiency growth, you had to be reducing your gap, you had to reduce the non-proficient, and so that was the way they were measuring at that time. All of that, by the way, is now gone. Adequate yearly progress no longer exists. Annual measurable objectives no longer exist because there is no waiver, since there is no Child Left Behind any longer. So what was decided is that this kind of freed us up to move forward to a brave new world of accreditation of schools, and the commissioner and state board's vision of Kansans Can is now going to be our metric. Kansas leads the world in the success of each student, and so the metrics that we will be measuring are kindergarten readiness, post-secondary completion and attendance, individual plans of study focused on career interests, social and emotional growth of each student measured locally, and we retain high school graduation rates as a measurable piece of all of this. So over time, this is the direction that accreditation will go. The other change is instead of actually accrediting individual schools, the new system will accredit the entire system. So the system of Lawrence Public Schools would be accredited, not individual elementaries, not individual high schools. So this is a departure from how we were doing business prior. Each school would have to meet specific metrics. We're now going to be looking at the entirety of the system and measuring whether it actually meets the requirements. The other piece of this is that it will be a 5-year process. So in the systems piece, we'll be looking at a 5-year study. We'll have an outside visiting group that Kirsten's going to go into those pieces of it in a moment. But it'll be a 5-year cycle with an external visiting team participating with us on the journey.
Oh, no.
Or
Next.
there.
All right. Kirsten Wondra. As Terry mentioned, the 5-year growth cycle is really how the systems are going about being accredited. So you can kind of see from the graphic up there, kind of where year 1, 2 through 5 will take us through. It's a similar process to what we've done at our buildings. We all have had school improvement plans. We'll continue to do that. And actually, the 3 E's fit really nicely with the new state system. So it's kind of nice that the two enmesh so well. What we've always done and what we've tried to do for kids in our schools really is what the state process now is. So that's really exciting to see that. So you'll see that we'll identify some more goals in action development. We'll do that. They'll just kind of be more sustainable over that 5-year period. Again, what we've done before really would work in this process. I need to quit right-clicking, sorry. So the framework, basically to get at those kinder readiness, individual plans of study, those kinds of things, we're looking at 5 R's. So this is what they've considered the keys of framework. You'll see relationships, relevance, responsive culture, rigor, and then results is kind of that end goal that we're aiming at, basically looking at all of those component parts. So each of those R's actually has a very detailed rubric. It's pages and pages of multiples checkpoints along the way. And we'll focus in kind of our efforts year by year as we kind of progress through this system to kind of look at all those component parts. So already different components and different schools are looking at different pieces and parts because we're all kind of at different places in that journey. But again, we all kind of look together in that accredited system. Additionally, we've already began to kind of crosswalk where our 3 E's kind of fit in these R's so that really there's not additional work happening. It's actually kind of nice because we have already articulated language that can kind of further support some of the growth areas we're looking to have in some of these component parts. And then as Terry mentioned, the state has asked us to make sure that we're involving and continue to involve all of our stakeholder groups. So buildings have always had leadership teams and site councils, so that component plays in and kind of informs the system above. And then we've kind of looked at the systems at the district level, and the Finance Advisory Council that as part of the consent agenda really made sense to be that district leadership team that helps kind of guide the efforts in our accreditation process and give some guidance to the district leadership team. So those kind of component parts we've already had in place. They just haven't been necessarily articulated as such, but that was just one augmentation. And then obviously informing you of the process in the next 5 years will kind of be an ongoing component. So do you have any questions for us?
Anybody have any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
One comment to make about that is we've had some discussions about how this fits with our 3 E's, excellence, equity, engagement, and because some of the terminology that you see there regarding relationships and rigor and those really kind of mesh well. So we're going to have some conversations about the language we use within our goals and whether it's not that we have to scrap excellence, equity, engagement, but really focusing in on the 5 R's is going to be something I think to eliminate any confusion that we want to be really mindful of when we look at goals. So I said we don't have that necessarily worked out yet, but it's something we're going to be thinking about.
Next report is Patron Insight Survey Results and Bond Election Discussion with Kyle Hayden, Superintendent.
Hello, I'm Rick Nobles with Patron Insight. Last week, you got a report that looked like this, which was pre-narrative, and then today you got a report that looks like this, which has it all in there. I'm going to talk from this one, and I'm going to walk you through the executive summary, and then I'll point out page numbers for specific findings. As you know, in November and December, we conducted a random digit dial telephone survey, 400 completed calls in the school district boundaries, which gives us a error factor of plus or minus 5%. We asked a number of questions in the process. I think we ended up with 60 some odd questions, and I'll go through those very quickly. The first big section that we look at is the grades. We asked patrons to grade the school district in a number of areas, and if you would turn to page 19 in your book, you will see a list of the various questions that we asked about. We asked for a numeric grade A, B, C, D, F, and then we convert that to a 5-point scale. And as you look at that, I would point out to you that statistically speaking, with the margin of error, everything from a 3.8 and above is at least a B, okay? So most of your grades fall in there. Your overall grade is a 4.0. You have a number of grades, including teachers, quality of education, facilities, technology, etc., that are above 4. Generally speaking, good grades as we look at these compared with other school districts that are your size and other school districts in the state of Kansas. These are all pretty good grades. The particular factors that are in bold print are what we call patron hot buttons, and that is where at least 81% of people were willing to give a grade or had an opinion. You'll notice that you only have 2 that don't qualify as a patron hot button, and what that tells us is that you have an audience that is very engaged and cares about everything that the school district does, and that's all good stuff. The second area that I would talk to you about, if you'll turn to page 23, we ask a strengths and weakness question. And this is open-ended. What do you think the greatest strengths of the district are, and what do you think the greatest weaknesses are? You'll see under strengths, teachers, number 1. Diverse population came in second. Strong education and curriculum came in third. Those are all things that you want to see people think that are strengths. When you look at weaknesses, this is the one area in a survey where you like the answer don't know. Because if that's the first answer people gives, it means that there's nothing that is bubbling to the surface of their brain. So don't know was the number 1 thing mentioned there. In terms of actual improvements, manage money and budget better, and listening to patrons. And I would simply tell you there's not a school district on the planet that can't listen to patrons more or cut taxes lower. The third section for us to think about starts on page 34. Support or opposition to a series of project ideas supplied by the district to ask people what they thought. We lumped all of the projects into 3 sections. There were a number of projects aimed at Lawrence High School. There were a second group aimed at the middle schools, and then a third group of projects aimed at Lawrence Free State. And as you look at those, you'll see that, and to give you an idea of the way this is worded, the questioner would go through and say, the school district is considering several renovations, improvements, whatever it might be, to Lawrence High School, and we'll read through that list and get to the end and say, if these were on a ballot issue, would you be more or less likely to vote in favor? Okay? So if you look at the numbers for Lawrence High School, generally speaking, all of the ideas, 73% of people found those favorable. The second group that, or 78%, I'm sorry, 78% for Lawrence High School. For the middle schools, that number was 73%. For Free State, the number was 51%. So you'll see that that is lower. Without getting too nerdy on you in terms of jumping into data, it's clear that your patrons care about equity among the schools. You have a little work to do to educate them why a much newer building in Free State needs construction or whatever it needs to remain equitable with Lawrence High School. So we ask about all of the different ideas without asking about money. And then we ask a question where it says support or opposition for a ballot issue. The first thing that we ask is what we call the benefit of the doubt question, where we say, now, if some of the ideas that you have just heard about were on a ballot election for the school district, would you vote yes? We haven't told them which ideas, we haven't told them how much money it'll cost. Just, does some of this stuff sound good? And you'll see that your number is 76%. It's an absolute home run. People are giving you the benefit of the doubt. They trust you. Then we go into a series of tax tolerance questions. I think I'm on page 40, beginning on page 40 with those. And what we do there is say, now I'm going to ask you about taxes. If some of the things that you just heard about were on a ballot issue and it would cost the owner of an average home $55 more per year, would you vote yes? And you'll see there at $55 per year, your level of support was 71%. Not much of a drop from the 76% that people said yes when they didn't know what the money was. If you drop that down, if you said yes, we're done with you. If you said no, I couldn't support that, then we ask about a lower level, which is $45 a year. You'll see when we ask about 45, your number jumps up to 74%. Again, if you said yes, we're done, but if you said no, we're going to ask you about yet a lower still number, which is $35 per year, and now your total support grows again to 76%. A lot of numbers that I'm throwing at you. I would just say in conclusion that it is clear you have the support of the public to pass a tax initiative that will not cost more than $55 per year. It is incumbent upon you to run a campaign and to let people know what you're going for and specifically and what it's going to cost the owner of an average home. But they're very good numbers from a planning perspective, okay? The last kind of big criteria that we look at, page 46, sources of school district news. We always want to find out where people are getting their news and how often they turn to those sources for news. You'll see there that friends and neighbors at 73% is the number one resource or the number one source of information for the school district. Not unusual. That is the case with most school districts, but presents a little bit of a problem because now you're kind of playing the telephone game where one guy says something to this guy and then to this, it kind of passes down the line, and it's kind of easy to get a communication garbled. Number two resource was the Lawrence Journal World print edition. And then you see teachers, administration, district printed newsletter. So you've got a combination there of informal sources, formal sources, and third party. And that's always good to see that you have a pretty good mix of people. The last section of the report is demographics. And as you read through the report, you'll see that we've broken it out geographically into quadrants. It's broken out by age of the respondent, whether or not they have a student now in the district, had one in the past, or never had one in the district. So there's a lot of data there for you to sift through that will help you if you decide to run a tax initiative. There's a lot of data there that will help you know who to communicate with, where that communication should go. Okay, and I'm sorry, that's a lot of pages in a very short time. I'd be happy to answer any questions if I could.
Anybody have any questions? Shannon?
I have one question. So on the, just so I understand the process, on the question where you asked about tax tolerance, did you only ask the follow-up, okay, well, if it was $10 less, was that only asked of the subset of people that said they would oppose it in the first go-round?
Yes.
So when, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to find that page.
You're on page, should be about page 40.
Okay. All right. So then when you have the numbers that go from 76%, 71%, 74%, that's still the total number of people who would support, but it's adding in.
The first two.
But it's adding in the percentage of people that change their mind after you ask the follow-up question at
Yes.
the lower level. Okay,
Yeah.
all right, I get it, thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else? I've got a quick comment, or it may be a question, both, I suppose, here. So in terms of the supports among the schools, when you list out all the, what were being done, that order doesn't surprise me. Lawrence High, then middle schools, then Free State down lower. But then when I'm looking at the letter grades, at least to me, it seems some discrepancy in terms of, so the quality of the high school facilities is ranked pretty high, which I know you're lumping everything together there, and so maybe people are.
19.
19, yeah. And so that's way up there, but then the equity amongst the different schools is all pretty much, it's down there near the B level, but they're all the same, almost one after the other. Which, to me, that says there's maybe some education that we need to do in terms, we did the bond work at the elementary schools. I would think equity has improved somewhat amongst the facilities relative to what we're seeing at the middle schools and the high schools. So having them all together like that just seems like there's some education that needs to be done as part of the campaign there.
And perception is almost always broad stroke. So if you ask people about elementary schools, it's 30,000-foot view, or it's very granular to their particular situation.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thanks.
And our final report is the capital outlay budget and project planning with Tony Barron, Executive Director of Facilities and Operations, and Kathy Johnson, Director of Finance.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm going to start and give you sort of the broad brush, big picture look of our capital outlay plan, and then Tony will come and visit with you about like specific projects on the list of items to do. So the capital improvement plan, just kind of a reminder, we use this plan to develop kind of that broad look at all of our buildings and try to look at it over the course of multiple years in order to plan for projects that we need to look at, needs that come up each year, so it is fluid. It changes a lot based on, if a roof goes out, that might take a higher priority than something that was maybe in the list above it. And so some of those things do change. The bond construction has changed a lot of this as far as how fluid it is and where things might go in the mix of things. Most of our construction occurs in the summer months, when the students are not in session. And the board always sees the final projects coming back to them through a bid or through a board enclosure, because the majority of the items on here are going to be above that 20,000 mark, which requires sealed bids and requires it to come back to you in some fashion throughout the year. So sometimes it's ahead of where you see the plan, sometimes it's after. And so through that bid process, you'll see that some come in for different amounts, some come in lower, some come in different based on they get into the bid and the specs or something might change things. So it is fluid, but this does give us a planning tool to determine how we're going to use those capital outlay dollars. I'm not going to try to read each one word for word for you, but the majority of the bond construction and the capital improvements have kind of been woven together to try to get the most out of our money in both sides. The mill levy in this fund, we have a maximum authority of 8. The board can elect to go something less than that at any point in time, but the state law doesn't allow for anything more than 8 mills in capital outlay. When we did the bond issue in 2013, the idea was that between capital outlay and that bond issue levy, that wouldn't go above those combined, and that we would try to always stay below that. And we have, in fact, done that. The bond and interest fund in particular has gone below that 10.577 that was set in 2013. Revenues into the capital outlay fund are somewhat restricted in that they are the mill levy, and if you sell a piece of property, something like that, but it's not, we have a little bit of state aid only for equalization, but most of your money is coming off of that 8 mills that you issue on the fund each year. We do have the mill levy for perpetuity. It's your ad valorem or your real estate property taxes and then motor vehicle taxes that come in there, and that 8 mills generates about $8.9 million. So new money that we can kind of know is going to be there each year is that 8.9. Anything that comes in above that is possibly miscellaneous income, could be sale of property, could be reimbursements, could be part of our lease proceeds when we do like the Apple lease or things like that then turn around and get paid out and then we have a lease payment. The mill levy over time has been most of the time at the 8 mills. If you go back to 11-12, we were at 7, and if you go back further than that, you'll see that we were at 4, 5, 6, a variety, and something less than 8. But primarily since the construction and some of that, we've left it at that 8 mills to help with technology, furniture, fixtures, those kinds of things that we've needed to deal with. Expenditures in this fund, it's very statutorily driven and primarily for projects, for things that you would think about that you would capitalize maybe in the company world that you might depreciate. So things that are very specific and kind of bigger dollars. They did tweak the language a little bit in that they allow for some maintaining and equipping of the buildings and not so specific to improvements only. And so the ineligible list per the state is still the same. We're not able to do bats and balls, some of those things you might call PE equipment. They're actually considered supplies. So you'll see that those are sort of the snapshot of some ineligible things. The list then goes into eligible, and you can see there are a little more of the higher dollar kinds of things and also what you would consider large improvements. The section there that I said new expanded, when I said the language changed, they did allow for some additional things to come out of capital outlay that have not been allowed before, and they really do kind of fall outside the realm of capitalize and depreciate, and so we're kind of dealing with almost 2 sets of guidelines there, what we can do as a school district and what might be considered capital. And so some of the things that you see in there is we can actually do repairs to equipment now out of capital, some repairs to vehicles, salaries for maintenance and equipment. So that's where we've had some discussion where custodians or mechanics, some of our tradespeople could come out of this fund. Performance uniforms, it's never been allowed before to do band uniforms or football uniforms or things like that. And so now those performing uniforms are something that could come out of this fund. Again, it's that balance of all the project needs that we have and start pulling in anything that's more operating kind of feel, then you have to take off what those projects might be. And so there is a balance there that always has to be maintained. Cash reserves is the other thing that I just want to mention in this fund it's a little bit tricky in that July 1 is going to always be where you see your highest cash balance, and that's because this fund is primarily a tax levied fund. Our taxes come in only in 4 kind of incremental points during the school year, and so July is a tax distribution just ahead of that, and we really don't get another one until the 20th of December. And so what that balance is in July is really what's got to fund those projects all the way to that December point in time, unless some other kind of revenue comes in to help with that. The only other way that you could maybe help with that would be to transfer from general fund or something like that, but that's a levied fund also. So that's an estate aid fund that comes very systematically. So that leaves, if you really got into a pickle, your contingency reserve fund to be that transfer in and then maybe transfer back once your tax dollars came in. And again, as we've used our cash reserves over time, including that contingency reserve, it creates that cash flow dynamic that becomes a little tricky and that we want to watch. So pointing that out, the average December unencumbered cash over the past 5 years is about 3.1. The high during that time was December 31st of 14, and it was 5.9. The low is this year. We were down to just 411,000 at the November 30 mark. We do have tax revenue coming in tomorrow, and some of the projects and things we had this first part of December are kind of tip us, so we're kind of getting our cash in at the same time we're using it all out to completion, and so that makes it a little tricky. Our balance July 1 of 15 was 4.4, so it's important that we pay attention to cash balance. This is a tricky fund, and unfortunately, if something really happened that was unexpected and sort of outside, we'd be juggling a little bit just because the projects kind of are planned out in this structure. So. Our 6-month expenditures from July to December on a 5-year average have been about $4.5 million, so right at what that July 1 cash balance is running the last couple of years. So don't know if you have any questions on that, but that's always a tricky one with this particular fund.
Anybody have any questions or comments?
I guess I would just reiterate for the public the point about the low point of the cash balance being at the calendar year end rather than at the beginning of our fiscal year, because one of the perceptions we've struggled with, particularly with legislators, is this notion that we have these really high cash balances, and when in fact they're not accounting for what you just described, which is the fact that we, with the cycle of revenue coming in, are the more appropriate time to look at cash balances for school districts is at calendar year end. Mm-hmm. And I can't emphasize that enough, because that gives a much truer picture of what our financial situation is in comparison to just kind of poorly done analysis that we have seen of that issue over the last few years.
December truly is our kind of low point because of taxes. So average expenditures over the past 5 years has been about $10.6 million. Our high was 14, and that was right before the bond issue, and that was because we put a lot of projects off, kind of waiting till the bond issue and then seeing what we could marry between the two to really capture the most efficiency out of the spending and the bids and things like that. Our low was right before the bond issue, and that's, again, we were holding. So the high came after when we figured out how we were going to mesh it, and the low was right before. You'll notice that they have been above, and even in the 16-17, the plan is above that 8.9. We still have some cash reserve, but we've also got some reimbursements that we count on, so we're kind of balancing that out. Some of the bids will come in low. Some of the things in the plan you'll see are things that maybe haven't happened yet, and they'll come back to you. For an example, Tony will show you there's an Apple lease potential again in the spring, and what level we decide to do that at, and some future things. All those will come back to you, so they're just part of this mix, as will thinking of budget planning. If you do choose to move anything into capital that would normally be general fund, again, that adjusts this list downward to some degree. So just a little snapshot, just sort of that cash flow in and out and cash balances and expenditures over time. We always have to publish at the 8 mills, and when the final assessed valuation comes in, we hope that that's right there at the 8 or slightly below it, so that we know we're capturing our dollars. You'll see that when we publish very high, because if you were to sell property or you were to get an unexpected cash flow of something coming in and you didn't publish high enough, you would not be able to spend it. A levied fund cannot be republished by law. So we have to make sure we've got the authority to spend the revenues that we do receive so that you can do those projects or those kinds of things that might come up even mid-year that you aren't aware of. And so there's a local revenue kind of holding amount so that that allows us to publish high enough, but we know we don't want that cash balance to be $935,000 at June 30. So that's where the published comes in, and then when you look at the planning, you'll see that it is a little bit below that but again, there's some unknowns that are not necessarily come to fruition because we're not through the year yet, and so that's kind of what the planning is going forward. Any questions with that? That kind of just gives you a snapshot. We do have a published state aid that we're supposed to get this year. Again, as you know, a couple of years ago, we were supposed to get it, and they ended up not giving it to us in the middle of the year. So I have not necessarily planned it going forward. I do have it in there in our planning column. I don't know if we'll get it, if we'll get half of it. I don't know what, the state circumstances could drive that mid-year. And I don't have it necessarily built in going forward because past years we haven't actually been eligible for it. We kind of just recently were, and then not knowing what the new formula is, leaving it out for the moment makes it much more of a conservative look. But if it came in, then it would give you the advantage to be able to spend it if it was there, and it would be a part of the planning going forward at that. So that's why you kind of just see it in a couple of snippets. So I'm going to turn it here to Tony in just a second, and he's going to kind of show you where those bond items are and capital project items are, and just knowing that this is still very fluid, and you'll have the opportunity to look at it again.
So Kathy, one question that I've never asked before, and your comments about the publishing budget made me wonder, is there a short explanation for why we don't have authority to republish levied funds?
Because you can't change the mill levy once it's set. So if you wanted to publish for a higher budget authority, you don't really have a revenue source if it's all levied funds because you can't change the levy. So they don't really think about or allow you to publish it higher to spend a different kind of revenue source. Since it's a levied fund, the expectation is your revenues in or levied revenues.
Because it's all based on the mill levy.
And thus, just because you want to get a higher authority, you're not going to be able to generate any new revenue because you can't change the mill levy once it's set. So that's the rationale behind it.
Okay.
Possibly you could, because you could have a sale of a property and think that, but they just wrote the statute that way right now.
Okay,
So.
thank you.
Mhm.
It should. Let me, hold on. Yeah, there's that one. Let me open both of them real quick for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tony Barron, Executive Director of Facilities and Operations. What you're looking at now is let me back up here. I'm going to go up to the, Kathy, I think I'm going to start with the other one here, if you don't mind. I'm going to start with the capital outlay plan, and then what I'm going to do is start with the capital outlay plan, what it is in its current form, and then I want to show you some items that we've pulled out of the capital outlay to pay for with some remaining bond funds that we have left from our current 2013 bond, and then some potential for the 2017-18 bond that we've removed from this plan. So first I want to start with this in its current form. We have the process, how it goes is what I did this year, or what we did as a department and as an organization is we put the formal request out to our building principals to use our school dude system to request capital improvement projects through the school dude system. As of, I think we had a November deadline that we asked them to meet. And when I got all the requests and I got them all filtered out, tried to get rid of all the duplicates, I had over 264 requests from our buildings for capital improvement projects, which was really, really good that we got the information from them and we received it. It was a little overwhelming to filter through and kind of figure out how to prioritize that. And so once we got those requests, we started to put them together. So what I have on a separate spreadsheet is all those requests listed along with a work order item next to it. And so where we went is now it's time for us to send those requests back to the buildings and ask them for prioritization on what they think is a priority. Now, there's going to be some givens that we won't send back, for instance, some roofs and some other items that we feel like it's not really it really won't be a choice. It's stuff that we have to do, some MEP items that we have to do also. But what this list consists of right now are things that we know that we have a number attached to and that we feel confident that things that have to get done in a somewhat short time frame. As you can see, as usual, the plan goes from 2017 to 2020. It's something similar to what you've seen in the past, and there's not a lot on there for our individual buildings. To be honest with you, what I want to do, we've highlighted a couple areas here that I want to go down to and just kind of put some emphasis on that. And let's go down to this first highlighted area here. If you look at the district-wide facilities and operations, I know one thing that we have considered in the past is moving our trades wages and taking them out of the capital outlay fund. As of right now, that number stands at $678,400. That number, is a pretty good number. That's a good chunk to take out of our capital improvement plan for improvements. And I know that's something that we're trying to do to free up our general fund dollars. So that's one particular line item that's fairly new this year that you probably didn't see in the past. I'm going to move down to a couple more highlighted areas. If you look here, if you look at the two lines we have highlighted, and I'm going to ask you to go up 2 lines from there to the lease technology 2014. Those 4 line items put together are new additions to this plan since 2014. That is based on our MacBook purchases for our teachers and also based upon the one-to-one initiative that has been working very well in our middle schools. Very appreciative of that, and I know in the future we're going to look at some options for the one-to-one initiative at the high schools also. You also see a new facility and warehouse lease for the new property that we've owned that we're going to house the warehouse on, that we're going to house our IRC facilities and operations, and at some point transportation. So that particular line item is freeing up dollars in our general fund for money we're paying to transportation, money we're paying to the warehouse right now. And so we're hopefully to gain some general fund dollars by spending some capital in this particular area. But if you look at those 4 and focus, there's a lot of money tied up in those 4 lines that are taken away from our general improvement of the buildings on a yearly basis. And so I just want you to be well aware of some of those numbers. And I want to also emphasize that this has been also such a great initiative for our students also, because I know that's very important. We've been fortunate to have the ability with our elementary schools being renovated with a $92.5 million bond that we have some nice schools now and releases a little bit of that pressure off of our capital plan. So we're in a very fortunate place with that being said. Any questions on any of those highlighted line items that I have up to this point?
Just a general question on the trades, wages and benefits. How's that calculated? I mean, is that X number of people? How do you get to 678,000?
So what I'm going to say, I'm going to start, and I'm going to have Kathy correct me if I'm wrong. So our building maintenance, believe we have 17 people in our building maintenance department, 17 employees, and I would make the assumption, and Kathy correct me, that all the benefits and the trades from those 17 people are in that line.
Actually, this group is your carpenter, your electrician. So
Okay.
I don't know if you're talking about the same people in
Yep.
the same maintenance. So it's your trade. It's truly your trades: HVAC, electrician, your carpenter, those people, and it's very specifically what their salary is and related benefits, and that's about what that will look like. So yeah, the maintenance and trades are the.
Okay. Yep. That's no problem. I'm going to scroll down to one more item. I know this has been on here for a little while, and it's an improvement at Langston Hughes that we have, a drive that we've done. And I know there's been some people asking if we're ever going to complete that drive. So I want to make sure that we go ahead and put that out there, that we do have an estimate for that, and we have the specifications written. I'm just waiting for approval at some point so we can put that out to bid. One thing I also want to talk to you about is us bringing this to you in December. I felt it was important for us as a department to get this to you a little bit sooner. Typically, we're coming to you in January, late January, February to get approval for this. What that does for us is we've been very purposeful about we're working with architects and engineers to get specifications written for a lot of these projects and construction administration. With that being said, it just takes a little bit longer. Once we get approval from you, we want to make sure we go out and get our specifications written and all the things going. And it's put us a little behind the last couple of years with the February approval. So that's why we wanted to move this up to January. Hopefully we can get a little bit ahead of that, get the contractors on the schedule, and hopefully get some of these projects done a little bit earlier in the summer would be something that would be beneficial for us. You also notice that we have all the roofs on this that are anywhere from a 0 to 4 year replacement cycle. If you look at the 2020, it's loaded up with roof replacements, and that would be the beginning of our 3 to 5 year replacement. The roof, I never have given a report on that, but the roof assessment is divided in a 0 to 2 replacement, 3 to 5 replacement, and a 5 to 10 replacement, and a 10 plus. And so the spreadsheet that I have on our desk carries that out to 2023. We decided just to show you up to 2020. So if you look, and this is a great example right here, all those big numbers on the right-hand side are roof replacements that we have that will be in the 3 to 5 year range coming up for replacement. That's a very important to consider in my world, and I hope it is yours too. So it's something that's very small that you don't really like to spend money on, but it's so important when it comes to dealing with issues on the inside of the building. So, and the study was great. Like I said, you guys don't want to hear about roofs that much, but it's the study that you approved for us. I thank you very much for that. It's given us some good direction on where to spend our funds, so I truly appreciate that. Any questions on this particular capital improvement plan? I want to move to the bond plan. So if you look here, this is a very simple spreadsheet here. What we've done, as I mentioned earlier, we've taken some of the needs of our current schools and some of the projects that we feel like that we weren't able to accomplish within the project themselves, and we have some additional money left over. Our goal obviously would be to spend every last penny of the $92.5 million plus interest and to get everything spent that we possibly can. So what we have, we're trying to close the books on some of our projects and see what we have remaining as far as some contingency money that we have left over. And so what we've done, we've taken some of our projects we have in store for some of these buildings that were affected by bond construction, and we want to pay with that, pay out of the 2013 bond fund what we have money that we have left and complete some of these projects. So if you look at the bond 2013 is just a simple column. Roughly, I'm going to scroll to the bottom here real quick, if you don't mind, roughly $845,000 that we would like to spend in that area. And then I'm going to focus a little bit on the, scroll back up here and focus on the bond 2018. That particular line item is everything at the secondary schools that was in the capital improvement plan last year that we pulled out and moved out of the capital plan. Plus we added some of the roof replacements. That would be the 3 to 5 year replacements. And then we came up with the number of $15 million that we removed from the current capital plan as it stands. So just want you to make sure you're aware of that. That's only 6 locations. So we have roughly, I believe we have 27 locations to take care of. So any questions on any of this information? All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Okay.
So, I'm back here. That's interesting, looking at you from here. So there's a couple of things I wanted to go back over, I guess, and make sure that to review what was presented last meeting by Gould Evans. The
the discussion of, the goals for this proposed 2017 bond election, and you can see, just kind of review that. When we look at our middle schools, it's the 21st century learning component, it's the student privacy component for our locker rooms, restrooms, and then the strategic mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and systems upgrades. For our high schools, the same types of things, plus in addition, in particular, at Lawrence High School, the safe and secure campus component, the professional space for faculty, and then item number 6 on the right-hand side with high schools is more about accommodating growth at Free State, where we've experienced growth of about 250 students in the last 5 years. I want to go over the budget with you too. So to remind you, what we shared with you last time was the idea that when we looked at the base budget that was above the line when we talked about, you can see the different numbers associated with each of the different schools. And then we had what was below the line as a couple of items that we talked about in particular. A couple of those items included lighting improvements at all the schools except for Lawrence High and West, which those had been flowed above the line just because the amount of the improvements in both of those schools just made it logical to go ahead and do those. And then the remaining priority 2 and MEP, priority 2 and 3, mechanical, electrical, plumbing upgrades at Lawrence High, Free State, and Liberty Memorial Central. If you were to take both of those items and move them up above the line, you'd be sitting around $86.8 million. If you talked about that in relation to the study, the Patron Insight study that was done, that gets you to that amount that would be a $55 a year increase for a homeowner of a $200,000 home. And when you look in relation to that, when people would ask the question about whether they would approve of an election of that magnitude, that was 72% approval. So I think some of the conversation we had at the last board meeting was, when we look at those below the line, those MEP, those lighting improvements, what does that get us and what number does that get us to? So that's the number it gets it to. And then the other thing it gives us is the savings that we talked about before in general fund, which equated to, if you did both of those options, you're looking at $97,000 approximately in general fund savings a year just from efficiencies. And then you see the 8-year payback. The other thing I wanted to refresh your memory on is, and just show you that bond levy mill impact. This is the document that George K. Baum, Dave Arterberry showed you last time. It didn't have the $87 million specifically in there, but just wanted to make sure you understood that that's what I was referencing. The other thing I want to reference is the bond election calendar. So when you look at the bond election calendar, it's really small. You can see that this was based on the December 12th meeting, so we're looking at December 19th. One of the things we want to talk about is whether you would have a mail-in ballot or a walk-in ballot. A mail-in ballot, estimated after conversations between Kathy and Jamie Hsu, would be around $130,000. A walk-in ballot would be approximately $100,000. So there is a little bit more money invested in a mail-in ballot. Indications that we receive not only from George K. Baum as far as their workings and dealings with other school districts is that there's been a lot of success with mail-in ballots, in particularly with school districts, and in particular with special elections. So this would be a special election because there's no other regular general election during the spring. If you map this out, you would see that the board would potentially consider this as a bond resolution to go to an election on January 9th, and then a potential election would occur May 2nd. And that would allow enough time to do all the necessary things as far as approvals, either through the State Board of Education
also just the organization from the county and getting prepared for the election. So there's nothing necessarily that the board needs to officially approve as far as an action item. I think it's more about just kind of getting an understanding for whether the board is willing to proceed with an $87 million bond election. It was slightly below that. What we hadn't figured in for is a couple things that we could supplement some technology funds for, especially for some software improvements that we're considering at this time. We've done that before in a previous bond in 2005 that allowed us to kind of implement the B+ system that really does all of our financial management. And so we're looking for some other integrations with that, and that would take us to an even number, but would allow for some ability to do that without dipping into general fund dollars. So it's between now and January 9th, what would have to happen is, I guess with consensus from the board to move forward, why we would go to our bond legal counsel, and they would help us draft the resolution. And within that draft of the resolution would be proposed ballot language that would include just the kind of the components of what we were talking about. And I can work on that obviously with Marcel and Shannon as we proceed, and we would have that ready for the board to view and have discussion and approve on the January 9th meeting. If there's nothing else you need me to show here, I'll go back up there. Okay.
I guess I'd just share my thoughts. I personally am strongly in favor of doing the mail ballot election. I'll just say that. I think that would be a very wise use of the additional $30,000. I think we would be more likely to get a better turnout and higher participation amongst our school families in particular. So that would be my preference. I've struggled with the decision about go with all of the extra MEP and lighting projects or not, but I think in the end, one of the things that came out of our last bond election was that the community was very supportive of us trying to find ways to improve our efficiency in our buildings and save general fund dollars. And so if we're going to ask for additional dollars to do something, I think that that's a wise item to include. So I would also be in support of going for the higher dollar number if there's consensus amongst the board on that issue. So thanks.
I would agree about the efficiency and the lighting. I think that just makes sense to move some money from operating into a longer, amortized vehicle. Where's the election money come from? What source is that on our financials?
So that would be a general fund expense.
And for those who are new, we did do a mail-in ballot and with our last one, and it was, that'd be great information to have if we could have, because I know that we had a really high return rate on that mail-in ballot, and so that made us feel a lot better about that election, those election results.
So the mail-in would have actually been for the local option budget increase, which was 2 years ago, maybe 3. And the last bond was a walk-in. So, but we did have extremely high results, positive results with the local option budget increase. I believe it was favorable 80-some%. And I don't remember the participation for sure. We could find that out, but it was, it turned out very well.
And I'd just say that I'm also for moving those below the items above. In addition to the efficiencies that Tony mentioned, the $96,000 per year, there's additional, and that didn't include the other O&M costs, right?
Comparing those numbers, Henderson Engineers, I haven't made contact with them. I'm going through the architect to get those. We have our numbers, our real numbers ready.
Okay.
I want to compare with them before I bring something
But
to you.
their numbers are energy, correct?
I agree.
Utility costs associated with the energy.
From what I heard through the architect is they had some operating costs integrated in that
Okay.
number, and I'm trying to figure out what that number
Gotcha.
is. So.
The point being that there may be additional savings beyond that. So And beyond that, there's also improvements in the quality of the space that you get from that. There's comfort, visual comfort, thermal comfort issues and stuff that also come with those improvements, so. Anybody, any other comments? Okay. So, yeah, so go ahead and proceed with the paperwork for it to come back to us on January 9th for approval. Yep. All right. So do I have a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.